Well, I have to thank James for that very kind introduction and for the opportunity for me and my wife Barbara to visit Madrid, this storied city. We've never been to Spain before, so this is a real treat. It's too bad that we're here, though, on false pretenses, wasting our time talking about a non-existent climate emergency. And it's hard to understand how much further the shrillness can go. As this started out as global warming, then it was climate change or global weirding, climate crisis, climate emergency, what next? But stick around, it will happen. I hope sooner or later enough people will recognize the phoniness of this bizarre environmental cult and bring it to an end. So let me see if I can get this to advance. I'm actually very grateful to Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, who just a few weeks ago made this statement at a prayer breakfast: believe in climate change as though it's a religion. It's not a science. Now, as a number of our earlier speakers have said, James in particular, we're here to talk about science. And so I'm going to ignore what she said, but I would say that as an American citizen, what she says gives me a little pause, because for the non-Americans, we have a set of amendments to the Constitution which were supposed to guarantee the freedom of American citizens. And the First Amendment to the Constitution, I'll read it, it's very short, says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment. And what the good senator is saying is clearly in violation of the First Amendment. It's unconstitutional. Let me now down to one more. So here's what we're being told. We have a climate crusade. The senator herself said, this is not science, this is religion. You know, crusades have a bad way of ending. Typically, many people are hurt. No good is done. A few cynical opportunists profit, and most people pay the price. And the same thing will happen with the climate crusade if we permit it to go forward. And I pray that we can stop it before it does too much damage. For the few of you who may not have read this wonderful book, I recommend it to you. You can get it from Amazon, many other bookstores. I think you can even get copies online now, so you don't have to pay for it. It was first published in 1841 by Charles Mackay, a Scottish journalist, and it was required reading if you worked for Bernard Baruch, the American financier at the end of the 20s, who made a killing on the Big Depression by short selling at the right time, because he recognized the madness of crowds. The title is wonderful, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And that's what the climate movement is. But here is the first few lines of this book. I'll read it. In reading the history of nations, we find that, like individuals, they have their whims and their peculiarities, their seasons of excitement and recklessness, when they care not what they do. We find that whole communities suddenly fix their minds upon one object and go mad in pursuit, that millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught by some new folly more captivating than the first. So here we are. And of course, this is an ancient human problem, recognized by the Greeks, by the Romans, presumably by many previous people whom the gods would destroy. They first make mad, and that's what's happening now with climate. There are lots of people out there who are just stark raving mad about climate. I hope we can bring them back to their senses. But again, I quote from Charles Mackay, who said, let me see, men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. And so much brainwashing has been done, it's going to be very difficult to bring people back to reality. In fact, many people say we need to give them an off-ramp, and some of you and I should talk about that at some point. Well, now let's come back to what we're really talking about, and what we're really talking about is pollution. And nobody wants a polluted world. You know, we want to live in a clean world. This is a picture of Shanghai. Barbara and I have been there on days like this, and it really does look like this. You can barely see the bottle opener building there. And the reason for this pollution, however, is not carbon dioxide. It's not methane. You can't see those gases. And pollution like this should not exist. One should do everything possible to stop it, but there's been pollution like this in China for centuries. Marco Polo remarked about this when he visited China. And the problem with parts of China is it's downwind from the Gobi Desert. And with the right sorts of winds in the spring, there is Gobi Desert dust all over China, including Japan. So there's not a lot that can be done about that. That's going to continue. That's why there's these huge loess districts in China. But we don't want that. We're not in favor of this picture. But CO2 is not part of that picture. CO2 is completely invisible. As Goose mentioned earlier, CO2 is the stuff of life. We're made of carbon. We exhale carbon. We're busy polluting the world in this room simply by breathing out. And I like to point out that our own breath doesn't differ that much from the composition of power plant exhaust. It's mostly the nitrogen that we breathe in. Not much happens to that. There's more oxygen in our breath, but there's oxygen left in a power plant too, because it's normally run a little bit oxygen rich. And then there's water and CO2, so exactly the same components. And that's what you need to get energy in the world that we live in. Here's a picture of Barbara in New Jersey, standing in front of what was once a green field, now is covered with black solar panels, and there are more and more of these where there were once beautiful green cornfields and soybean fields. So I'm not sure that's the right way to improve the environment. I preferred the environment the way it was. And here's another renewable energy icon, the wind farms in Palm Springs, California. I'm not sure this is an improvement of the environment. And to really run the world on wind, large parts of the world will be covered with stuff like this. Is that really what we want? On top of this, I hope some people will say more about the complete unreliability of this type of power for the modern world. It doesn't really work very well. When I hear people telling me about the virtues of renewable, why don't we follow the Energiewende that the Germans have pioneered? I'm reminded of this fable from Aesop. It should be well known, but there was this fox who was not as clever as he thought, and he got his tail cut off in a trap. You can see the tail there in the trap. And of course, it's very embarrassing to be a fox without a big bushy tail. So he assembles all the other foxes and say, being tailless now is completely in fashion, and so you all should cut off your tail so you'll be like me. And so my advice to the foxes of the world is don't emulate this tailless fox that we see in a few parts of the world. It's not a good idea, and it doesn't make you look any better, and it's bad for your citizens. And of course, many of you have the same feeling of this poor lemming. He says, wait a minute, something feels wrong. And the answer is, shut up, you moron. Do as you've been told, it's for your own good. And so this is the COP meeting that we're attending now. Lots of lemmings are here. Now, James Taylor gave me leave to actually say something about science. And so I'm going to now address an audience of physics students. And so for a moment, think of yourselves as physics students. I'm showing here pictures of two famous German physicists, Max Planck on the top right, and Karl Schwarzschild on the bottom right. Both of them were around in the early 1900s when they did their best work. And on these slides is the heart of the whole global warming scare, or the climate emergency scare. And you can see on the top panel there is a blue smooth curve, which is the famous Planck energy spectrum of a black body, with a well-defined temperature. So this is the radiation emitted as a function of frequency. Frequency goes from right to left on this slide, and intensity goes up. So it's the kind of spectrum you would get if you could put infrared radiation through a prism, like Newton did with visible light. And below the blue curve of Max Planck, Professor Planck, is a jagged dark curve, and that is what I would call the Schwarzschild curve, and that's what the Earth radiates because of greenhouse gases. Planck's curve is if the atmosphere were completely transparent. Suppose we had an atmosphere of argon, then we would get the Planck curve. But we don't. We have an atmosphere with oxygen and nitrogen and water and carbon dioxide, methane. All of them are on here. So the jagged gaps in this emission from the Earth are due to the greenhouse gases. And you see this clearly from satellites. If you compare this picture to a satellite picture, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now, we're worried about a climate emergency because if you look closely at these curves, in addition to the black curve, the Schwarzschild curve, there is a red curve, which is a little hard to make out. It overlaps with the black curve just about everywhere. But the red curve on this chart is what happens if you double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere and you don't change anything else. You keep the temperature of the profile the same, you keep the amount of water vapor, other gases the same. It's actually quite hard to see the difference, but that's doubling CO2. We haven't nearly doubled CO2. It would take a long time to double CO2, over a century. But we're talking about uprooting the world's economy, impoverishing the world's people because of the difference between that black and that red curve. That's it. And I guarantee you that there's no way that anyone who knows any science can dispute this curve. That's the truth. The bottom panel shows what happens if instead of doubling CO2, you double concentration of methane, CH4. Again, you can hardly tell the difference. If you look over to the extreme right of that curve, you'll see that there's a slight difference between a red and a black curve for doubled methane concentrations. And to double methane, again, is going to take several centuries at the rate of increase that we have now. And yet, because of that tiny difference between black and red, we're talking about putting the farmers of Ireland out of business, the farmers in Holland and New Zealand and across the world, and we're going to stop eating meat because of that little difference. I mean, this is absolute madness. The gods have really made us mad if we're going to take actions based on these curves. All right. I'll say one more thing about this. There's also a green curve, and that's what happens if you take away, say, all the carbon dioxide on the top panel. So you see, carbon dioxide actually does reduce the amount of energy reaching space, because if you took it all out, you'd get more energy going to space. as shown by the green curve. But if you double it, it makes almost no difference. And so the scientific jargon for this is that the CO2 effects are saturated. You put as much as you can put in, and it doesn't matter if you put more. One way of trying to explain that is if you paint your house with a good coat of red paint, it doesn't really make the house look any better. If you put a second coat of red paint, it will look just as red as it did before if you've used good paint. And that's what's happened with CO2. We've already got the thick coat, and it doesn't matter if you make it any thicker. It's not going to make any more difference to the warming of the Earth. Goose mentioned how badly my models perform. This is actually from Nature Climate Change, so it has to be right. But what you see in the red bars is the actual observed warming. Left to right is warming per decade. And this is a histogram, so it's the results of various predictions, including one I made in 1982, which was wrong. It was too big, just like everybody else. And so there's something fundamentally wrong with the projections of climate change. And so it's absolutely insane to be basing policy, extremely ruinous policies, on the basis of models that are not working at all. And people like to say we're doing an unprecedented experiment on the Earth. No, we're not. We're actually in a CO2 famine now compared to the history of the Earth. So this is a chart that comes from Bob Berner in Yale, the late Bob Berner, who was sort of the world expert on paleo CO2. And so over most of the modern geological era, the Phanerozoic, from the Cambrian on to today, CO2 levels have been much, much higher than now. Plants do much better in the higher levels that have prevailed over this period than in the basically famine levels that we're living in now. So if anyone says the Earth has never been here before, they're wrong. The Earth has almost never been to low levels like we're at now. Only once in the past, in that period in the Permian, around 300 million years ago. And the increase in CO2 that we're having, the only real effect that you can be sure is due to CO2 is that the Earth is greening. There is no more extreme weather. There is no acceleration of sea level rise. None of the big emergencies exist. You can measure them, they're not there. But the one thing that does exist, and which was predicted and is certainly there, is the greening of the Earth. And you notice this greening chart is one of the early ones, but there are many since then. It's satellite data. Most of the greening is from arid parts of the Earth, in the Sahel, Western India, Western Australia. And that's because the main effect of CO2 fertilization is not so much fertilization, it's better use of water. So if there's more CO2 in the air, plants are able to live in drier regions than they could at the low CO2 levels. So the dry areas of the Earth in particular are greening up, but also plant yields are going up, forestry yields are going up, agricultural yields are going up. And it's all because of more CO2. What's bad about that? Well, of course, someone will figure out something bad. There's a big list of things that supposedly your horses get fat with too much grass. For the most recent one I saw. Yeah, absurd. Well, let me close since I'm a scientist. There's allegedly this 97% agreement among scientists. But anyone who takes the trouble to look into this, there have been a number of very good papers. There's, I won't try to list them now, but you can find them that deconstruct this. And 97% of scientists simply do not agree that there's a crisis. If you really push them, especially in private, they will admit that the evidence for anything alarming just isn't there. But secondly, scientific truth, it's not like voting on, a law in Congress or in Parliament. There really is an absolute truth about the external world, and you can't vote down the law of gravity or, the second law of thermodynamics. It doesn't matter how many votes you take, the laws are still the laws. And so scientific truth is not determined by consensus, it's determined by fact. And all of the facts contradict alarmism. There is no climate emergency, and there will not be a climate emergency. You can keep an emergency going for a long time. Here's sort of the prime example. This is Trofim Lysenko in the Soviet Union. He levitated his version of biology for 34 years, from 1930 to 1964. During that period in the Soviet Union, with the full backing of the Communist Party, first Stalin and then Khrushchev, if you dared to mention Mendel when you taught your biology class, you were lucky. If you were only fired from your job, you could easily be sent to the Gulag, and several people were condemned to death, for admitting that genes exist and control inheritance. And it was forbidden to use hybrid corn and things like that. That would have greatly helped, the agricultural problems of the Soviet Union, all because of ideology. And make no mistake, this was not driven by science. It was driven by ideology. We're going to change human nature. We know how to do that as the great Bolshevik party. You can't change human nature. I wish you could. Finally, here is another example where consensus was dead wrong. This was continental drift, and this is Alfred Wegener, who promoted the idea of continental drift based on geological evidence. It was very compelling, and it was thoroughly rejected, especially in America. In my country, in 1928, American geologists had a special session to debunk Wegener, and so it was much like COP. It was to come in and talk about what a stupid idea continental drift was. But he was right, and sooner or later, we will also be vindicated, those of who are raising the concern about the distortions of science to support climate alarmism. So let me summarize two simple thoughts: that policies to slow CO2 emissions are based on flawed computer models that clearly exaggerate by factors of 2 or 3, probably more. And more CO2 is really an overall benefit to the world. So there's these costly mitigation schemes are actually harmful. They're not even a little bit helpful. They're harmful to the world. And so I look forward to all of your help in trying to get this message out. It's very hard given the fire hose of propaganda that so many of our fellow citizens have been subject to. But we have nature on our side, so in the end, we're going to win this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Happer. I'm going to take the liberty of asking you a question here that jumped. I had quite a few questions and observations that popped into my mind, but with the time I have, I was fascinated when you mentioned that back in 1982 that you had published a paper forecasting a certain amount of warming, and you forecast more than what occurred. So I'm interested in learning at what point did you determine that you would forecast too much warming, and how did you go about, because now you're delivering a more realist message in terms of what to expect, whereas human nature would seem to be that you might rather double down on what you predicted to preserve your reputation or to make it seem like you hadn't predicted things wrong. So I'd love to hear your insights about, since that prediction, your thought process and how you emerged to your position you have today.
Well, thank you, James. The prediction was a book that I co-authored during a Jason summer study, and it was called something like The Effects of Increasing Carbon Dioxide on the Environment. I don't know the exact title, but and we did our best to calculate the effects of CO2. And I think everyone knows that if you take the direct effects of CO2, it's very hard to predict more than about a degree of centigrade warming for doubling CO2. And so we knew, that would not interest our sponsors. And we also knew by that time there had been these idea is that if you could somehow get water vapor and clouds to amplify this, you know, then you could get larger warmings, you know. So that's where the large warming came from. The large warming came from assuming large amounts of water vapor feedback, which it looks like is not there. And so, you know, I can't argue with observations. And but I, you know, we didn't know that at the time. It was a guess, and so we guessed wrong.
Well, I think it speaks wonders to your integrity that you would make that recognition and then adjust what you're forecasting. And it seems to me that too many people, scientists are human. I mean, it's hard to fault too much when people say, well, let me dig down on what I said before. But oftentimes people make it seem like skeptics, climate realists are, you know, off on some wild tangent. But here we have you were predicting more temperature increase, and then keeping an open mind. That's the important thing. We all should keep an open mind on this issue and other issues. It led you to adjust your observations, your predictions, etc., which I think is fantastic. One other question I think I have time for before we move on to our next panel is that your organization, the CO2 Coalition, calls to mind when you showed your photograph of your lovely wife Barbara in front of the solar panels. It called to my mind that there is so much more to environmental stewardship than carbon dioxide emissions. And the climate activists would like us to forget about all other environmental issues and think that you are green if you reduce carbon dioxide emissions and nothing else matters. And so I think of the land that is utilized by wind turbines, solar panels, the effects on wildlife, on birds and bats, etc. Can you tell me more about why you decided to give the name the CO2 Coalition and the messaging that your scientists provide about the benefits, the environmental benefits of carbon dioxide?
Well, it was an attempt to counter all the propaganda about the so-called pollutant, carbon dioxide. You know, we're dumping pollution into the air, and you know that's hard to take if you know anything about science when you're actually breathing out, you know, 2 pounds of CO2 a day. So each one of us is polluting the world. You know, if you multiply 2 pounds of CO2 a day by 7-8 billion people, that's a lot of CO2. So if you follow this to its logical extreme, you know, you have to get rid of people. And we thought that was a very pernicious message. In fact, some people are calling for that. They say we have to get rid of 7 out of 8 people to bring the population down to 1 billion, you know. Well, okay, which 7 out of 8 of us is going to leave the world? None of us have to leave the world, you know. The world is working just fine. The population will stabilize itself naturally, as it has in all of the developed world, and the way to stabilize it is to make people prosperous. And the best way to make people prosperous is to give them affordable energy, and the best way to do that now is fossil fuels. We may find better ways in the future, I hope we do, but that's what we've got now, and we should use them. And we shouldn't be embarrassed about emitting CO2. We should be embarrassed about emitting SOx and NOx and fly ash and things like that. That shouldn't happen. But CO2 is not something we should worry about any more than emitting water vapor. We also breathe out water vapor, about the same amount. So the whole thing is absolutely absurd. You know, it's a cult.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Happer.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and consider donating to the Heartland Institute to support more vibrant free markets, greater individual liberties, and more videos like this one.